The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, our final guest's book tells how animals conceive of death and dying and what it can teach us about our own relationships with mortality. Here to tell us about Playing Possum, welcome to the show, Susana Monsó.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Can I ask, we are going to talk about some of the animals that are in the book, but can I ask why the title?
Playing Possum?
Yeah.
So the book in Spanish is actually called Schrödinger's Possum. But the press decided to go for Playing Possum because they thought it might mislead the readers into thinking it was a physics book rather than a philosophy or animal behavior book. So the original title, Schrödinger's Possum, refers to the fact that opossums, when they feel threatened, they play dead, and they do so in a very elaborate way that I argue in the book gives us some clues for how animals understand death, not because of the opossums themselves, because for them this is likely an automatic behavior, but rather because in order for this to be a convincing display, we need to postulate an understanding of death on the part of the animals who are on the receiving end of this behavior. So for you to be fooled by a display of death, you have to have some understanding of what it means to be dead. So it was called Schrödinger's Possum because the opossum is like Schrödinger's cat in that it's both alive and dead at the same time. And in English, there's this wonderful expression, playing possum, which actually means playing dead. So it was a very serendipitous coincidence. And so we thought it was a perfect expression to go for the title.
Yeah, I was reading that the possum even simulates her glands so that she smells like she's dead.
Yes, it's fascinating. So she adopts the bodily and facial expression of a corpse, and her bodily functions are reduced. So her breathing rate drops, her heart rate drops, her body temperature drops. These glands that you mentioned, they expel this putrid smelling liquid so that she smells dead, and she completely stops responding to the external world. So you could even pick her up or even cut her tail, which some scientists unfortunately did in the 60s, and she wouldn't react. So if you didn't know in advance of her little trick, she would absolutely fool you into thinking that she's actually dead.
And does she do this in case a predator's nearby? She does it to protect herself?
That's right. This is something that they do when they feel threatened and they feel that they have no chance of escaping. They play dead, which can serve to protect them in various different ways. For instance, a predator might not be into eating animals that have been long dead. And since she smells putrid, they might prefer to leave the animal alone. Or they might understand that because the animal is dead, she's not going to run away. So maybe the predator is not hungry in that moment and decides to store her catch for later. And the prey then could take advantage of this loss of attention on behalf of the predator to, make a run for it.
Yeah, clever. Well, I know you've written the book with both humour and empathy, so I'd like to just go through a few of the animals. Apparently, ants attend their own funerals.
Well, so this title is the title of one of the chapters, and it refers to a phenomenon that we have observed in the lab. It doesn't actually occur in the wild. And so here's what happens in the wild. Ants will engage in this behavior called necrophoresis, which consists of taking corpses out of the colony and out into the refuse pile, which is outside of the nest. And this is something that obviously presupposes a capacity to tell ants who are alive from ants who are dead. But we know that this is not really mediated by any understanding of what it means to be dead, because it's very easy to fool the ants. So this behavior is actually an automatic response to certain cues that are given off by corpses, such as oleic acid, which is a chemical component that is given off by putrefying ant corpses. So if you take oleic acid and you put it on a little pebble or a piece of leaf or even a live ant, the other ants are going to treat it as though it were a corpse, and they are going to pick it up and take it out into the refuse pile. So the idea of an ant attending her own funeral, it refers to this idea that the ant might be like surprised, well, metaphorically speaking, at being picked up and taken out into the refuse pile when they're actually alive and well, because they've been fooled by these scientists.
Yeah. They're so strong, though, aren't they, ants? I find them fascinating.
Yeah, they're really fascinating individuals. The more I read about them, the more fascinated I am. The latest article that has really blown my mind is one where they observed that in some ant species, whenever there's an ant who has an injured leg, the others will perform an amputation and groom the wound that's left behind after the leg is amputated. So it's kind of like a surgery. It's really amazing that they are pre-programmed. This is not a learned behavior. This is something that they're pre-programmed to do. And I find it just mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. Very, very clever they are. And is it true that chimpanzees clean the teeth of their dead?
So we have observed this on at least one occasion. There's one report that I know of. So this was a chimp who had died. He was an adolescent male. And one of the females of the group that he was very bonded to, she was older than him, stayed behind once the rest of of her group mates had left, and decided to clean the corpse's teeth for a reason that we're not quite sure why this happened. But what is interesting is that in the case of the ants, we can pretty much predict how an ant is going to react to a corpse, because this is dependent on these pre-programmed, like automatic behaviors. Whereas in the case of chimpanzees, what we see is much more variation in how they respond to corpses. And this shows us that there is an intervention of more complex psychological mechanisms that suggest that there might be an understanding of death.
Crikey. And one more for you. Is it true that whales carry their dead for weeks?
So again, this is something that we have observed on occasion. This is a phenomenon that is relatively common in mammalian mothers who lose an infant. It's especially prevalent among primates. And this is because primates have hands, and this makes it easier for them to carry the corpses of their babies. But we have also observed it in some cetaceans. And there was one case that became very famous that made the rounds on all kinds of news outlets. And it's the case of an orca nicknamed Taliqua, who was observed carrying her baby's corpse for 17 days and over 1,000 miles. And this is extremely surprising if you think that this is a species that doesn't have hands. So she had to be balancing this corpse that weighs hundreds of kilos on her snout, preventing it from sinking or being carried off by a current, and having to regularly resurface to breathe, having to continue feeding and everything. So it shows us that there was a massively strong motivation behind this mother's behavior.
And why do you think she did it? Is it a bit like a grieving process?
So that's the likeliest interpretation, is that this is a grieving process that's triggered by the mother-infant bond. So this kind of behavior, we see it in mothers of species where there's a lot of maternal care. So not all species have maternal care. If you think, for instance, about these famous turtles who lay their eggs in the sand, and then they just leave and let the eggs hatch on themselves and on their own, and they don't care for the newborn babies. This is a type of reproductive strategy that we see in some animals, where they have hundreds and hundreds of babies in the hopes that one or two of them will survive, and they don't provide any parental care. In contrast, what we see in other species is we see fewer offspring and very high levels of parental investment to make sure that the offspring do make it to maturity. So in species where we see this kind of deceased infant carrying, as it's called, are species that show this kind of parental investment in offspring. And so for this parental investment to happen, biology or like evolution has endowed these mothers with very strong maternal instincts, an instinct to care for their babies. This is something that's also present to a degree in many human mothers as well. And what happens is that if the infant dies prematurely, these bonds don't disappear instantaneously. It takes a while for the mother to become detached to the corpse, and so this is why we see this response. So it is a grieving response, because grief is the process by which an individual comes to accept the death of another, and this is what we're likely seeing in these mothers.
Yeah, you also see it in chimpanzees, don't you, massively?
Yes, you see it in chimpanzees. In fact, there was a case very recently in the Spanish news because a chimpanzee in the zoo in Valencia carried her baby's corpse for 7 months. Aww. I've never heard such a long period of time, but I have to say that very often what happens is that the corpse disintegrates somehow. So it might be the case that other mothers don't carry it for that long because there's just not a corpse for that long. But in this case, the corpse must have mummified in such a way that allowed for this behavior to be carried out for 7 entire months.
Heartbreaking, it really is. You are, of course, in Spain, aren't you? Are you in Madrid?
Yes, that's right.
And is this your first book, Susana?
Yes, I published it in Spanish in 2021, and it's just been translated into English. And it's also an updated and revised translation.
Brilliant. I'm so glad you put it in English. And are there some photos in as well? Because I had your website up and there's some beautiful photos on there.
Yeah, and I mean the photos on my website are just from an online repository of open access photos. But in the book, there are a few images that have been extracted from these scientific reports because I thought that, you know, some of the pictures are a bit gruesome. I have to say that some readers have mentioned that. But I thought that they were important to illustrate these points because very often when talking about these topics, it's an image is really a very powerful way of conveying the ideas that I'm trying to convey. So I decided to include them.
Yeah, well, we can certainly all learn a lot from animals. The book is called Playing Possum, How Animals Understand Death. It's by Susana Monsó, who we're chatting to now, and we're selling it right now on our website, TRE.radio. Do you want to just give your website out as well, Susana?
Yeah, that would be my name and surname, susanamonso.com.
Lovely. Well, it's been great to chat to you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.